Okay, let's get into this. We're doing a deep dive today into a really interesting piece of writing.
Mm-hmm.
It explores that connection between our beliefs, how we think, and maybe most importantly, how we end up feeling.
Yeah, that belief, thought, feeling chain.
Exactly. And this dive is based on a specific text, one that focuses on this idea that you must be real in order to be right.
That's a strong statement right
It
there.
is, and the core argument is pretty direct.
Yeah,
Our emotions aren't just like random weather patterns.
right.
They're deeply tied to our inner world, especially our thoughts. And those thoughts, this writing suggests, are shaped by our fundamental beliefs.
So it's presenting this powerful link. If you're thinking, which comes from your beliefs, if that thinking isn't aligned with, well, what the text calls truth or reality.
Then your feelings won't feel right either. That's the idea. Feelings follow thoughts, thoughts follow beliefs.
Yes, basically.
And this deep dive is really for you listening to help you sort of quickly absorb these insights. We'll look at some examples from the text that make this connection clearer.
Uh-huh.
We'll try to understand why feelings are seen as these important signals and explore the different ways the writing says we can respond to them, especially this idea of acknowledging them honestly.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start with that foundational connection: beliefs, thoughts, and feelings.
Right. The source argues pretty straightforwardly that emotions generally come from our thought life. If our thinking, based on our beliefs, isn't right.
Our feelings will reflect that. They'll be off somehow.
Exactly. And it uses a story, a really vivid one, about a 10-year-old boy, Matthew.
Right, Matthew. Good kid, athletic, loves baseball, all that.
Yeah, sounds like a typical 10-year-old boy in many ways.
But he started having some real struggles. Striking out in baseball wasn't just a disappointment.
No, it led to him getting really, really down on himself. Seriously down.
And this showed up in his behavior, right?
Yeah.
Acting out actual depression.
And fear, too. Fear of being alone, sleeping alone. It was clearly impacting him and his family quite a bit.
So what does the source say was the root cause here?
Well, it points directly to a wrong belief, a deeply held one. Matthew had started believing his self-worth was completely tied to how well he played baseball.
Ah, okay. Performance equals value.
Yeah, and the writing calls that belief, and this is a direct quote, "What a lie."
Strong words.
Very. And it also suggests he was, maybe unconsciously, stuffing those feelings down, which stopped him from realizing they were based on something false.
Okay, so he's stuck in this negative loop. What changed?
The turning point is described as, well, pretty significant. His dad went to some kind of class mentioned in the source and then took Matthew for a walk. And on that walk, his dad talked to him about his identity in Christ, his relationship with God, the security he had there, even the authority he had. And the text says Matthew was, quote, all ears.
He was ready to hear something different.
Seems like it. And the result described as immediate. The depression lifted instantly.
Instantly.
Wow. That's what it says. The fear took a bit longer, but it gradually faded away completely. His whole sense of identity shifted
From baseball player to
being a child of God. And the source directly connects lifting that depression to him recognizing and basically ditching those false beliefs.
That's a powerful illustration of changing a core belief affecting emotions.
It really is. And the writing uses another example, more of an everyday thing, to hammer this home, the car example.
Oh yeah, the car. That one really makes it clear. So imagine you hear just part of the story.
Right, like your parents say they won't let you buy a car. That's all you hear initially.
Instant disappointment, right? Maybe anger, feeling crushed. Your emotions just plummet.
Totally. But then maybe a minute later, you get the rest of the story.
They're not letting you buy one because they're buying it for you.
Exactly. And what happens to your feelings?
Complete reversal. You're ecstatic, grateful, probably jumping up and down.
And this shows the source's point perfectly. Our feelings react instantly to what we think is true in that moment.
Whether it's the whole truth or not.
Precisely. It's about what we believe is happening.
Right. And this text really emphasizes that, okay, maybe we can't just switch off a feeling once it's there.
Yeah, that can be tough.
But we do have significant influence over our thoughts. And since thoughts drive feelings,
Then managing thoughts becomes key. The text stresses filling our minds deliberately with truth, with the kind of knowledge it presents to get the right perspective.
and that's how you start to gain some control, even over feelings that seem overwhelming.
That's the idea. You work on the thinking to influence the feeling.
Okay, so if feelings follow thoughts and beliefs, why do we have them? What's their purpose, according to this text?
That's a great question. The writing frames feelings as signals, really important ones, like an emergency warning system for our soul.
An emergency warning system.
Yeah, it uses an analogy with physical feelings, specifically pain.
Okay.
It tells a story about someone who had knee surgery. An incision cut a nerve, leaving part of their knee totally numb for months.
No feeling at all.
None in that spot. And because of that, they couldn't feel potential harm. Like, they once rested a hot coffee cup on the numb area without realizing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they couldn't feel the heat, but they could actually smell their skin burning. The lack of feeling meant no warning signal.
Wow. Okay, so no feeling led to actual physical harm.
Exactly. And the source applies this inwardly. It suggests if you couldn't feel emotions, anger, sorrow, joy, your soul would be in serious trouble.
So emotions are like God's way of alerting us to what's going on inside.
That's exactly how it puts it. God's emergency warning system.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. The text explicitly says feelings themselves are, quote, neither good nor bad. They're just part of being human.
Right. They're not inherently sinful or virtuous. They just are. They're information.
So the call to action following that pain analogy is don't ignore them.
Pretty much. Just like you wouldn't ignore burning your skin, you need to learn to respond to these emotional warning signals. They're telling you something important about your inner state, or maybe about the thoughts you're having.
Okay, so we have feelings, they're signals, they follow our thoughts. Then the writing talks about 3 main ways people tend to respond to these signals.
Yes, 3 options it lays out. The first one is stuffing them.
Stuffing them down. Just ignoring them, pretending they're not there, choosing not to deal with them.
Exactly. And the text is pretty blunt about the downsides. It quotes King David from Psalm 32, saying, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long." It suggests the stuffing can even cause physical problems.
Like headaches, nausea, trouble sleeping.
Yeah.
Things mentioned in the reflection questions it includes.
Right. And it warns that stuffing feelings can make problems seem, quote, bigger than God, like insurmountable.
And even damage your connection with God. As he says, it can short-circuit that relationship.
Yeah. So clearly the source sees stuffing as, well, pretty dangerous and unhealthy. Not the way to go.
Okay, what's option 2?
Option 2 is kind of the opposite. Letting it all hang out.
Ah, the unfiltered explosion.
Pretty much. Reacting without thinking, lashing out, telling everyone exactly how you feel, losing control.
Got it. Any examples?
It uses the Apostle Peter. He definitely didn't stuff his feelings.
No, definitely not.
But that lack of filter got him into trouble, right? One minute he's declaring Jesus is the Christ.
The next, he's rebuking Jesus and gets called Satan.
Ouch. Exactly. Or promising he'll never desert Jesus, then denying him 3 times just hours later.
Yeah, not his finest moments.
So the source points out that while maybe this venting feels like a release for the person doing it,
It's often really damaging to others. It says it's usually, quote, unhealthy for others around you, can destroy relationships.
right. And it pulls in some guidance from scripture here, like James telling us to be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger.
And Ephesians, be angry and yet do not sin.
The writing interprets that right kind of anger as being angry at sin or injustice, like Jesus turning over the tables in the temple.
Not hurting people.
Right, not destructive anger at people.
Okay, so stuffing is bad. Exploding is often bad for others. What's the third option? The recommended one.
The third way, the one it advocates for, is acknowledging our emotions.
Acknowledging them.
Honestly acknowledging them to God and to ourselves.
And the core idea here is being real.
Exactly. It makes that really strong statement, quote, "In God's eyes, if we're not real, we're not right."
Wow. So pretending is actually counterproductive.
That's the argument. If you go to pray feeling angry or depressed, but you put on a happy face and pretend everything's fine, God isn't pleased. Why? Because he already knows how you feel anyway.
Authenticity is what matters.
Authenticity, being real, that's presented as key.
Okay, so acknowledging is the path. But how? How does the source suggest we actually do that? Especially with difficult feelings.
Good question. First, it talks about acknowledging honestly before God.
Which might feel weird, right? Especially if the feelings are like really negative or ugly.
Definitely. And it uses a really stark example. Psalm 109, verses 8 to 13.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. David is praying some incredibly harsh things against his enemies.
Brutal stuff. Wishing death, poverty, curses on their families. The source calls it, quote, pure hatred.
So why highlight that?
The insight the text draws is crucial. Those raw, hateful words didn't shock God. God already knew the depth of David's pain and anger.
Ah, okay.
The point wasn't that the feelings were good, but that David was being completely honest about them with God. And God, this writing suggests, understood and accepted him right there in the middle of all that mess.
So God can handle our raw honesty.
That's the message. It even uses a story about a college student, Nancy. She felt like, as a Christian, she shouldn't let off steam.
Mm-hmm. Keep it all polite?
Right. But the source affirmed her, saying taking that hurt, that anger, that maybe even hatred, and dumping it out before God, even if it means screaming or yelling when you're alone, can actually be healthy.
Healthy because
Because it stops you from dumping it destructively onto other people. It's a safe outlet.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just venting at God, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. The source balances it. Acknowledging the feeling also involves recognizing your need for God in that feeling. It points out David ends that same psalm, Psalm 109, asking for help and giving thanks.
So it's honesty, but also dependence.
Yeah, it's bringing the real you, feelings and all, into relationship with God.
Okay, acknowledging to God. What else?
The second key way is acknowledging honestly with trusted friends.
Trusted friends. It emphasizes that, doesn't it?
Very much so. It specifically says being real in front of a few trusted friends, not just broadcasting everything to everyone.
So discretion is important.
Yeah, it points to biblical examples. Paul had his companions Barnabas, Silas, Timothy, people he shared his struggles with.
And Jesus had his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. He took them into the garden when he was agonizing.
Exactly. And the writing makes a bold claim here. It suggests it's actually difficult to maintain long-term mental health without at least one person you can be truly emotionally honest with.
Wow. That's significant.
It is. It even says if you have 2 or 3 people like that, quote, you are truly blessed.
So acknowledging our own feelings is vital. But then there's the other side, the relational part. This dishing it out and taking it.
Right. Because living this out in relationships isn't always easy, is it?
Definitely not. It's hard to be emotionally honest ourselves sometimes, and maybe even harder to receive it when someone else is raw and hurting.
Yeah, the source tackles that taking it part. First, how we respond when others share painful feelings. It gets that our first reaction might be to pull back because we just don't know what to say.
Totally relatable. What's the advice?
The insight is pretty profound, I think. It suggests that when someone's in deep pain, the words aren't really the main issue. Quote, we shouldn't respond to their words, we should respond to their pain.
Respond to the pain, not the words.
Yeah. The idea is that the harshness or intensity of their words might just be showing how much they're hurting inside.
Okay.
It gives that really moving example of the pastor at the hospital after a young man died. He didn't have the right words.
What did he do?
He just sat with the grieving parents and cried with them, and years later they told him, quote, we didn't need words, we needed love. We knew you loved us because you cried with us.
Wow. Just presence and empathy.
Exactly. It connects that to Jesus weeping with Mary and Martha. He didn't give a sermon right then. He just wept.
In Paul's command, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep.
Meeting people where they are emotionally.
Okay, so that's taking it. What about dishing it out? Expressing our own emotions to others.
Right. How do we do that honestly, but also constructively? The writing offers guidelines.
Oh, good. We need those.
Guideline 1. Honesty is key, yes, but it needs to be done in love. Speak the truth in love, from Ephesians.
And kindness matters. Proverbs. A gentle answer turns away wrath.
But a harsh word stirs up anger. Exactly. How we say it makes a huge difference.
It uses the football uniform example, right?
Yeah, the scenario where you get home, you're totally wiped out from a terrible day.
Exhausted, probably hungry, stressed.
And your uniform isn't ready for practice, and you just explode at your mom. You blaze at her, is the word used.
Been there. Maybe not about a uniform, but...
Yeah, we all have. But the key insight the source draws is your mom wasn't the real cause of that explosion.
She was just the trigger.
Exactly. The dynamite was already in place, as the text puts it. Bad day, tired, hungry, frustrated, and just blaming her isn't healthy or fair.
So what's the alternative? Still be honest, but...
Non-attacking honesty. Instead of an accusation like, why didn't you wash my uniform, the source suggests expressing your own state. Mom, I'm feeling completely wiped out right now.
Using I statements.
Yeah.
Focusing on your feeling.
Right. It takes the blame off the other person, lets them off the defensive hook, and actually makes it easier for them to respond helpfully to your need.
Okay, that makes sense. Guideline 2.
Know your limits. This one's important. The writing advises that if you're feeling seriously angry or really tense, anxious, depressed, maybe pause.
Go and have that big conversation right then.
Probably not. postpone important decisions or talks because you're much more likely to say or do something you'll regret.
And it suggests being upfront about needing that space.
Yeah, saying something like, look, if we keep talking about this now, I'm going to get angry. Can we please talk later when I'm calmer?
Okay, good practical advice. What's guideline 3?
Recognize physical factors. Our physical state massively impacts our emotional state and our limits.
Like being tired or hungry, like in the uniform example.
Exactly. Or it mentions hormonal changes, teenage years, a woman's menstrual cycle. These things can absolutely shorten your fuse or make you more emotionally volatile.
So self-awareness is key, knowing how your body affects your emotions.
And also being sensitive to how it might be affecting others. Being aware of these physical realities in ourselves and extending grace to others because of them.
Right. It's all interconnected.
Yeah.
So bringing this all together, how does this connect back to you, the listener? Why is this deep dive important?
Well, the writing explicitly links handling emotions well to, quote, the important process of renewing your mind.
Renewing the mind, changing those underlying beliefs and thought patterns we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And it also connects it to preventing negative influences, specifically keeping the devil from gaining a place through unresolved emotions or lies we believe.
So it has spiritual implications, too.
Definitely. And it encourages you, the listener, to reflect personally. Maybe think about the questions the source itself raises. Like, do you relate to Matthew's struggle with tying worth to performance?
Or maybe just feeling like you're seeing your circumstances wrongly sometimes.
Yeah. And asking yourself, how do I usually handle my feelings? Am I a stuffer, an exploder, or am I trying to acknowledge them honestly?
It's very practical in that way. It prompts you to identify your own potential false beliefs or half-truths, situations where your feelings reacted strongly based on incomplete information, like that car example.
Right. And it suggests practicing connecting thoughts and feelings in daily life. Like, if a cashier is rude, what do you think? And then how do you feel? Seeing that pattern, it calls, quote, what you think is what you feel.
Becoming more aware of that link in real time.
Exactly. And it also suggests finding those healthy outlets we mentioned, ways to, quote, blow off steam, maybe through sports, or just talking honestly with a trusted friend.
Because God knows what's inside anyway, right?
That's the core idea. He accepts the reality as long as we're not hurting ourselves or others in how we express it. It even links emotional health to just practicing basic kindness towards others.
Okay, so let's recap briefly. We've explored this idea that feelings follow thoughts and beliefs.
That emotions are vital signals, not good or bad in themselves.
And that this writing strongly encourages acknowledging them honestly to God and with trusted friends.
And we looked at how to express them lovingly and respectfully towards others while also knowing our own limits.
And the core message from this source seems really powerful. Being real with our feelings isn't just okay. It's actually fundamental to being right, authentic, aligned with truth, healthy.
Yeah, that's a great summary.
Which brings us to maybe a final thought for you to consider, building on this. The source suggests our view of things determines how well we handle life's pressures.
Perspective matters.
So, if honestly acknowledging our difficult emotions is, as this suggests, a key to seeing things rightly and responding well, what might we be missing? What might we be preventing ourselves from seeing or doing by not allowing ourselves, or maybe others, to be fully real with the struggles we face?
That's a challenging question. What truths might be hidden?
Exactly. What hidden truths about ourselves, our beliefs, maybe our situations, might we uncover if we dared to be truly honest with the full range of our feelings?
Something to definitely mull over.
Maybe even as a practical step, exploring some of those strength giver scriptures. The source mentions passages about identity, God's character, as a way to deliberately fill your mind with that right thinking it talks about.
Yeah, actively working on that foundation of truth.